When the average person thinks of an explosive celebrity divorce, the mind immediately goes to the messy headlines, the alleged betrayals, the courtroom spectacles, and the vicious custody battles. We think of the scandal. But for a certain class of the global elite, the tech moguls, the studio heads, the sports legends, the true explosion of a divorce is not measured in tabloid inches, but in the sheer, life-altering scale of the financial numbers. The real disaster is not emotional. It is fiscal. We are talking about the transfers of wealth so immense that they can restructure multinational corporations, influence philanthropic giving on a global scale, and fundamentally rewrite the legal landscape for every wealthy person who follows. When the commitment to till death do us part fails, the question quickly becomes, who gets half of the empire? Tonight, we dive into the second part of our series on explosive divorces, focusing entirely on the 5 largest financial disasters in celebrity history cases defined by breathtaking settlements, catastrophic prenuptial failures, and the creation of entirely new classes of multimillionaires. We begin at the ultimate benchmark for sports celebrity splits, a divorce that reset the record for financial risk and proved that even the greatest athlete in the world could not escape the jurisdiction of community property law. Top 5. The record breaker. Michael Jordan and Juanita Vanoy. To understand the financial magnitude of Michael Jordan's divorce from Juanita Vanoy, you have to appreciate the scale of his brand in the mid-2000s. He was, and remains, a singular, globally recognized entity. By the time Jordan and Vanoy separated for the final time in 2006, they had been married for 17 years, a union that began relatively early in Jordan's career before he accrued the vast majority of his endorsement wealth, the 6 NBA championships, and the monumental profits from the Air Jordan brand. This specific timeline is the crux of the financial explosion. When they first married in 1989, their combined assets were merely a fraction of what they would become. In the eyes of Illinois law, the subsequent growth, the creation of one of the world's most profitable personal brands, the acquisition of mansions, jets, and vast investment portfolios, was all considered marital property. Without a solid prenuptial agreement that clearly delineated separate assets and future earnings, Juanita Vanoy was legally entitled to a staggering share. The divorce itself was, by celebrity standards, relatively quiet. There were no public slanging matches, no tearful court appearances, and no leaks of sordid details. The explosion was purely financial. When the settlement was finally announced in December 2006, the figure was reported to be $168 million. This payment instantly became the largest known celebrity divorce settlement in history at the time, a benchmark that stood for years as the ultimate symbol of the financial risk associated with long-term, high-net-worth marriages lacking proper legal protection. The announcement was met with gasps from the financial and celebrity press, immediately filed under the banner of Behind the Lights Archive, Financial Fails, S4, E8, for the sheer scale of the dollar amount. It was a tangible 9-figure quantification of the marital estate, and more critically, the legal vulnerability of even the most powerful public figure. It was a mandatory payment that Jordan had to make to extricate himself from the marriage and move forward with his subsequent career as an owner and entrepreneur. The Jordan-Vanoy divorce served as a massive public service announcement to the rest of the world's billionaires and A-listers. Even if your career is untouchable and your brand is bulletproof, community property and common law can, and will, force you to liquidate a significant portion of your empire. It sent lawyers scrambling to re-examine the prenuptial agreements of every high-earning client. If the Jordan case showed the financial risk of a lengthy marriage without a prenup, our next case involves a far more complicated web of assets, a global media empire where a single divorce agreement required the division of companies and the subsequent acceleration of a powerful tycoon's ruthless business agenda. This was not just a personal payout, it was a corporate event. The $168 million payout to Juanita Vanoy proved the financial vulnerability of the sports world's elite. But when you move from the personal brand of a basketball player to the sprawling, complicated holdings of a global media titan, the numbers shift from hundreds of millions to billions. Our next case is not just a divorce, it is a corporate restructuring masquerading as a personal separation. It is the moment one of the world's most powerful men had to carve out a staggering portion of his empire just to regain his freedom. TOP4. The media empire split. Rupert Murdoch and Anna Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is synonymous with global media power. As the chairman of News Corporation, he spent decades building a sprawling network of newspapers, television stations, and film studios that stretched across continents, fundamentally influencing political and cultural discourse in the Western world. When he married Anna Torv in 1967, the company was still in its formative stages, meaning their 32-year marriage spanned the entire explosive growth of the Murdoch empire. This history proved to be the financial flashpoint of their 1999 divorce. Anna Murdoch, a journalist herself, was not merely a spouse, but a long-term partner who had spent 3 decades raising their 3 children and standing alongside Murdoch as he built his financial fortress. Her position, combined with the lack of a clear modern prenuptial agreement that accounted for the exponential growth of News Corp, meant she was entitled to a spectacular sum. The negotiations were kept fiercely private, but the eventual settlement figure that was leaked shocked the global financial markets. Reports indicated that Anna walked away with a settlement valued at approximately $1.7 billion, with around $100 million of that figure paid in cash, and the rest tied up in shares and assets. This amount remains one of the largest divorce settlements in history, dwarfing every other financial figure of the era and serving as a stark warning about the commingling of personal and corporate assets. The explosion of this divorce had a direct, measurable impact on the global financial landscape. The sheer size of the payout required a strategic division of assets and a complex handling of shares within the family trust that controlled the bulk of News Corp. The corporate world instantly filed the case under Behind the Lights Archive, Corporate Chaos, S6E11, recognizing it as a permanent case study in the danger of a massive enterprise being inextricably linked to the marital status of its chief executive. But the most telling detail of this financial disaster was the speed and timing of Murdoch's subsequent actions. The divorce was finalized in June 1999. 17 days later, Murdoch married Wendy Deng, a News Corp employee 38 years his junior. The haste was seen by many as a clear sign of the transactional nature of the separation. A massive financial payment was required to clear the decks and enable Murdoch to rapidly establish a new life and a new succession plan for his dynasty. The Murdoch-Torv divorce proved that when you are operating on a scale that affects global markets, a personal separation can become a strategic corporate transaction with a billion-dollar price tag. It demonstrated that even the most powerful media mogul is constrained by legal frameworks, forcing him to sacrifice a fortune to secure his future. If the Murdoch divorce taught us about the cost of building an empire with no prenup, our next case is a far more emotional story. A catastrophic payout where the victim of infidelity walked away with half of a Hollywood legend's entire fortune simply because they lived in the wrong state for his lawyers. The divorce of Rupert and Anna Murdoch was a corporate-level transaction necessary to divide a media empire. But for our next case, the explosion was purely personal, driven not by the complex structure of a multinational company, but by the relentless, unsparing logic of California law. This is the story of a long marriage, a massive fortune, and a legal environment that mandated the largest celebrity payout in Hollywood history simply because a prenup was deemed unnecessary 3 decades earlier. Top 3. The $500 million betrayal. Mel Gibson and Robin Moore. Mel Gibson and Robin Moore were married for 26 years, a remarkably long run in the volatile world of Hollywood relationships. They married in 1980 before Gibson transformed from a cult action star into a global A-list director and Oscar-winning powerhouse. They had 7 children together, building a life that, for years, seemed shielded from the most extreme excesses of celebrity. However, the lack of a prenuptial agreement, an agreement considered unnecessary and perhaps even unfashionable when they married, became the detonator for a financial catastrophe. Their separation was filed in 2009, following years of immense professional success for Gibson and subsequent high-profile public scandals that had severely damaged his reputation. The key to the financial explosion lies in the legal jurisdiction, California. Because Gibson and Moore married in California and lived there throughout the period of his greatest financial gain, the state's strict community property laws applied. This law dictates that any assets, properties, or earnings acquired by either spouse during the marriage must be split exactly 50/50 upon divorce, regardless of who was responsible for the income or how long the separation lasted. Since they had been married for over a quarter century, virtually every dollar, every piece of property, and every residual from his biggest films were considered joint marital property. The ultimate figure of the settlement was shocking. When the divorce was finalized in 2011, Robin Moore walked away with an estimated $425 million. This represented half of Mel Gibson's then estimated $850 million fortune, an unprecedented sum in Hollywood history, far surpassing the previous record held by Michael Jordan. The settlement included half of his lucrative future movie residuals and earnings, ensuring her financial independence for life. This colossal payout became a foundational case study, immediately categorized in Behind the Lights archive, Legal Lessons, S7, E3, demonstrating the overwhelming financial power of community property laws when applied to vast, long-term celebrity earnings. For Gibson, who had already suffered immense professional damage from his public outbursts and controversies, the settlement represented a final, devastating financial blow. The Mel Gibson and Robin Moore divorce taught a ruthless lesson. In certain legal jurisdictions, the failure to secure a prenuptial agreement means risking half of an entire career's worth of labor and success. It proved that in the absence of a signed document, the law will treat a $500 million fortune exactly the same way it treats a suburban home, a simple 50-50 division. If this case revealed the consequences of no legal agreement, our next entry demonstrates the catastrophic financial consequences of having a poorly written, highly vulnerable legal document, a single piece of paper that cost a legendary filmmaker $100 million. The Mel Gibson divorce was a $500 million penalty for following no legal agreement at all. But our next case demonstrates the profound financial danger of thinking a casual, hastily scribbled document will suffice when the fortunes involved are gargantuan. This separation is the legendary story that Hollywood lawyers cite in every single prenuptial negotiation, proving that a single piece of paper, or lack thereof, can cost an icon a fortune. Top 2. The Napkin Debacle, Steven Spielberg and Amy Irving. Steven Spielberg, the visionary filmmaker, and actress Amy Irving married in 1985. At the time, Spielberg was already an immense success, having directed blockbuster hits like Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and E.T., but he was still a few years away from the towering, multi-billion-dollar success of Jurassic Park and the founding of DreamWorks. The story of their financial disaster centers on the preparation, or lack thereof, of their prenuptial agreement. It is widely reported that the couple, perhaps in a moment of romantic carelessness or undue haste, drafted and signed their prenuptial understanding on a cocktail napkin or another informal piece of paper before their wedding. While the details are clouded by years of legal mythology, the essence of the story remains constant. The document was spectacularly unsound. When Irving and Spielberg filed for divorce in 1989, the casual agreement came under intense legal scrutiny. A key principle of contract law, particularly in high-stakes prenuptial agreements, is the requirement for both parties to have independent legal counsel and full disclosure before signing. Because the napkin prenup was so informal and allegedly lacked these crucial protections, a California judge ultimately ruled the agreement invalid and unenforceable. The ruling was a financial earthquake. Without a binding prenuptial agreement, California's community property laws kicked in, much as they did in the Gibson case. Irving was therefore entitled to half of the assets Spielberg had accumulated during their 4-year marriage. The resulting settlement was a staggering $100 million. In 1989, a $100 million celebrity divorce settlement was a monumental figure, a sum so massive that it immediately entered the financial and legal history books. The napkin prenup became the ultimate cautionary tale, instantly filed in Behind the Lights archive, Prenup Nightmares, S1, E2. It was a devastating lesson in legal precision. When dealing with 9-figure fortunes, there is zero room for casual documentation. Every comma, every notarization, and every signature of counsel must be flawless, or the entire estate is vulnerable. The Spielberg-Irving divorce didn't just cost the filmmaker a fortune. It fundamentally changed the way Hollywood handles marriage contracts. It created an entire industry dedicated to crafting ironclad prenuptial agreements, ensuring that no creative genius would ever again risk their financial empire on a spontaneous, ink-stained whim. But even this $100 million disaster pales in comparison to our number 1 entry. Our final case involves a figure so large it defies comprehension, a single transaction that instantly made one of the world's wealthiest women and reshaped the future of a tech giant. This is not just a divorce, it is the single largest wealth transfer in human history. The Steven Spielberg and Amy Irving divorce was the defining legal disaster of the 1,980 seconds, forcing Hollywood to finally take prenuptial agreements seriously. But as the 21st century dawned, the nature of wealth itself changed, shifting from residuals and movie rights to stock options and technology shares. This meant that when the world's most successful entrepreneur and his wife decided to separate, the resulting financial transaction would not just set a new record, but would represent the largest transfer of wealth between individuals in human history. Top 1. The $38 billion share transfer, Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott. Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott were married for 25 years, a period that spans the entire meteoric rise of Amazon. Their relationship began before the company existed. They were literally partners in the founding of the business, driving cross-country to start what would become the world's largest e-commerce platform. Like many couples in the early days of a startup, they had no prenuptial agreement, an omission that would prove to be monumental decades later. By January 2019, when they jointly announced their decision to divorce, Jeff Bezos was the richest man in the world. Their combined fortune was predominantly held in Amazon stock, valued at over $150 billion. Because they married and primarily resided in Washington state, another jurisdiction governed by community property law, Mackenzie Scott was legally entitled to half of all assets accumulated during the marriage, including the vast majority of those Amazon shares. The public immediately braced for the most explosive financial and corporate disaster in history. Experts speculated that if the split were fought in court, Jeff Bezos could lose control of Amazon, a possibility that sent tremors through the global stock market. The fear was that the division of his massive controlling interest would destabilize the company he built. What happened next was a study in high-stakes negotiation, executed with remarkable efficiency and mutual respect. The couple avoided a public court battle and announced a settlement in April 2019. Mackenzie Scott agreed to walk away with a specific portion of the Amazon stock, 25% of the shares they held together, which represented a 4% stake in the entire company. That 4% stake was valued at approximately $38 billion at the time of the settlement. This figure shattered all previous records, immediately filing this divorce as the ultimate benchmark in Behind the Lights archive. Billionaire Breakups, S11, E7. The transaction instantly made Mackenzie Scott one of the wealthiest women in the world. Crucially, she also made two key concessions that protected Amazon and mitigated corporate turmoil. She gave up all her voting rights on those shares to Jeff Bezos, and she gave up her interest in his other major assets, Blue Origin and the Washington Post. The financial explosion of the Bezos divorce lies not only in the size of the payment, but in its transformative aftermath. While Jeff Bezos remained the world's richest man, Mackenzie Scott became a philanthropic force almost overnight. She immediately signed the Giving Pledge and embarked on a campaign of trust-based giving, rapidly donating billions of dollars to nonprofits with no strings attached, fundamentally shaking up the traditional world of philanthropy. The divorce didn't just divide a fortune. It created one of the most significant and fastest charitable enterprises ever seen. The Bezos and Scott split proved that in the realm of mega-billionaire wealth, the financial consequence of a no-prenup marriage is measured not in millions, but in billions. A colossal, unprecedented wealth transfer that permanently altered the global financial and charitable landscape. From Michael Jordan's $168 million payout, which set the standard for sports wealth, to the unimaginable $38 billion transfer of Amazon stock, this countdown has demonstrated the catastrophic financial reality of high-stakes celebrity divorce. We saw the harsh arithmetic of community property law punish the long-term marriages of Michael Jordan and Mel Gibson, exacting hundreds of millions of dollars. We saw the corporate shockwaves ripple out from Rupert Murdoch's hasty $1.7 billion settlement. We uncovered the cautionary tale of the infamous napkin prenup that cost Steven Spielberg $100 million. And finally, we examined the unprecedented scale of the Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott split, a divorce so immense it required the restructuring of a global corporation and launched a new era of philanthropy. The enduring lesson from these financial disasters is brutally simple. In the world of mega wealth, love may be priceless, But divorce has a price tag that can be calculated down to the last share. These are the moments where the ultimate legal failure, the failure to secure one's assets, creates the greatest financial explosion. Thank you for tuning into Behind the Lights as we expose the cost of unprotected wealth. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to join us next time when we dive into another explosive story.